My name is Phil Chambers. I'm here to talk to you about what Peakon has found over the duration of the crisis. So we've kind of analysed around 1 million responses through March and April. About 25,000 comments gone into this presentation. So first of all, if you're not familiar, hopefully many of you are, then Peakon is an employee success platform that converts real-time employee feedback into insights you can put to work. All the data that you're about to see in this presentation comes from an analysis of real survey responses since the outbreak of COVID, just to be clear. So just a little bit about our data set. We believe we've got the world's largest structured data set of its kind, and it's growing pretty fast, so 87 million responses. And roughly speaking, we're getting more than one response every second now, and quite a lot of commentary too, and really good global coverage. With 160 countries and then over 60 languages represented. So we're going to look at how employee comments globally have evolved in the wake of COVID-19. So if you cast your minds back to January the 27th, obviously it feels like a really long time ago now, particularly once we've all been in lockdown and maybe one day is merging into the next. But this is the first time that we saw COVID-related response fall into the Peakon database. And obviously that comment came from China. We've then mapped on the charts here, you can see on the top figure, the number of employee responses that we're getting on a daily basis versus over time from late January to late March. And then you can kind of see on the bottom chart, like kind of the responses in Peakon. We don't have a massive exposure in China, so we were seeing commentary, but it wasn't a great size. So really, if you look at where the Peakon customer base is, which is Europe, US, it's a sort of eerie correlation with both being highly indicative of how COVID is spreading with the number of comments, obviously, from employees. If we look at the kind of terms that people were using throughout March, I think it's interesting some of the themes that we've picked out. Obviously, this was all a bit new and it perhaps seems a little bit quaint. The immediate response was obviously around stuff like hand gel, how we would work, how we would carry on working in offices. And I think even within our own organization, a lot of people believed that, somehow this was a bit of flu and it would all just blow over. However, of course, that didn't prove to be the case. And we saw a dramatic increase between March and April of comments related to COVID-19. Now, these don't look like massive numbers. Obviously, in a percentage terms, it's a huge increase. And just to give you, some background here, terms like manager, which are very, very common, would typically be mentioned in 2% of comments. So this became the dominant theme that employees were talking about globally. And actually, the way people started to speak about COVID switched. And as the lockdowns took hold, then it was much, much more about well-being, about stress, about how they would be safe. Obviously, family comes into this with children being off school, et cetera, et cetera. So it was fascinating to see how that shifted so quickly into April. And if we group together all of the terms that employees were using, then we can see there was a dramatic increase in well-being. So it kind of almost, it was 51% higher in March than February, and this continued to grow. So people really, starting to talk about mental health, about job security, anxiety, et cetera, et cetera. And if you look at this on a regional basis, you can kind of see this echoing what was happening globally. So we saw obviously early uptake in countries like Italy, which was sort of the epicenter of the European crisis, and obviously Spain following quite quickly afterwards, and later on UK and United Kingdom. It's interesting to see potentially how much better managed this has been in France and Germany, and particularly in Germany, where we know they've had excess hospital capacity and have perhaps managed to contain it more than we did in the UK due to our late start. So what's Peakon done in response to this? Well, we launched a set of COVID-19 questions, which you can see here. These have now been rolled out to around half of the customer base. So there's over 500 companies now actively using these questions. We get some really, really good results. It's worth noting at this point that to do the right thing, we decided to offer a basic version of Peakon and this question set for free for everybody, and that includes your setup and everything. So if you'd like to start, running real-time engagement with these questions, then you can do so today, and just pop along to our virtual booth. So if you look at some of the results from the COVID-specific questions, I think the good news is that overall, a lot of companies have responded extremely well. Employees generally feel safe. We took a deeper dive into some of our lower scoring elements. So, our company understanding how the pandemic may affect productivity. And whilst it was a high score overall, we've done an analysis where we can compare promoters and detractors on this question and what employees have been saying about this lack of understanding of productivity. So what we're really seeing is that as people moved into a remote working environment, in the detractor case, which was fairly common, then the productivity expectations were unchanged or indeed increased, and there were not conversations about this happening with managers or wellbeing, and in the detractor case, particularly people were perhaps prejudiced by some of the old ways of working. Remote working sometimes, or certainly has been frowned on in a lot of organizations historically, and managers thinking that people were just slacking off. Obviously, in organizations that were managing the transition to remote better, then there were more realistic expectations around workload, open discussions around this transition, and particularly parenting commitments, flexibility on. So what does this all data tell us? Then I think in conclusion, the recipe for sustained productivity at this time is really one of empathy and trust, rather than monitoring and pep talks. And that's sort of the simple takeaway from all of this. So if you'd like to learn more, then you can pop along to peakon.com/continuity, or we will be managing the virtual booth all day. So that is all I have for you today. So thanks a lot for listening, and see you all soon.